Hang on, sorry. I clicked the wrong thing.
I'm so glad I've never done that.
Okay, let's see. There we go.
Recording in progress.
Good morning. I'm Jennifer Palmer, and I'll be your online worship leader today. During the service, we recommend you have your Zoom screen set to speaker view. This is Common Ground, our celebration of worship for people of many paths who are gathering virtually to share in the responsible search for meaning and truth. Pathways is a warm and open community where all who come with open minds and kind hearts are welcome, regardless of ability, age, race, gender identity, or sexual orientation. If you're visiting with us for the first time today, we welcome you to our virtual service and hope you'll visit us in person when we can be together again. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. To send us a note about your visit or ask for more information about Pathways, email office@pathwaysuu.org. We hope that all who join us today find this a safe and inspiring online place to worship. Our opening song this morning is Bread and Roses. This song was inspired by labor union leader Rose Schneiderman, who was a firebrand of organizing and advocacy within the early women's movement. She originated the phrase bread and roses in a speech rallying women to fight for more than just the bare necessities. Her quote, "The worker must have bread, but she must have roses too," would go on to inspire a poem and one of the most famous songs in American history. Let's listen to it now and feel free to sing along while remaining muted.
As we go marching, marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, 1,000 mid logs gray, are touched with all the radiance that a sudden sun discloses. For the people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses. As we go marching, marching, we battle to for man, for marching spirits new. Yes, it is bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. As we go marching, marching, people hear our call, for the rising of the women means the rising of us all. No more the drudge and idler, tend and toil where one reposes, but a sharing of life's glories, bread and roses, bread and roses, bread and roses, bread and
As we virtually light our chalice this morning, please join me in these words by Florence Caplow. In recognition of Labor Day, we light this flame to honor all work, including the work of our hands and our backs. In gratitude for all the labors that support our world and for all those who boldly continue the work of justice, equity, and peace. I invite you now to join in a renewal of our sacred promises. Please read along with me. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve human need to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other. Our call to worship is by Eugene V. Debs, an influential organizer and leader of the American labor movement, read for us by Mary Kappas. Please go ahead, Mary.
The strike is the weapon of the oppressed, a people capable of appreciating justice and having the courage to resist wrong and contend for principle. The nation had for its cornerstone a strike, and while arrogant injustice throws down the gauntlet and challenges the right to conflict, strikes will come by virtue of irrevocable laws, destined to have a wider sweep and greater power as people advance in intelligence and independence.
Thank you, Mary. Our worship song this morning is by songwriter and union organizer Jim Garland. He moved within a circle of lefties that included Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie. Now let's enjoy as our own Michael Moore performs I Don't Want Your Millions, Mister.
I don't want your millions, mister. I don't want your diamond ring. All I want is the right to live, mister. Give me back my job again. Now you can keep your Rolls Royce, mister. I don't need your pleasure yacht. All I want is just food for my baby. Give to me my old job back. I don't want right to live, mister? Give me back my job again. We work to build this country, mister. Well, you enjoyed a life of ease. You stolen how we built, mister. Now our children are starving and free. I don't want your million, mister. I don't need your diamond ring. All I want is the right to live, mister. Give me back my job again. Just give me back my job again.
That was great. Thank you, Michael. Our speaker this morning is Gene Lantz. He is currently an officer of Texas Alliance for Retired Americans, AW Local 848, and the Dallas Central Labor Council. His Saturday talk show, Workers Beat, broadcasts on knon.org and 89.3 FM every Saturday at 9 a.m. Since 1985, Lantz has worked on labor history and labor communications in North Texas. Now we welcome Gene to our virtual pulpit.
Thank you very much. I've been more than 50 years on the labor side of the struggle between the workers and the bosses. And we used to sing that song, I Don't Want Your Millions, Mister, back when I was fired from LTV corporations during 1984 and 1985. I was fired for 13 months and finally got back in with back pay, which just shows the power of the union movement. Every year around Labor Day, I get a chance to talk about labor. This is actually my third gig so far this year. And it seems a little bit strange because I always realize that the people I'm talking to are American laborers. In other words, we worked our whole lives for a paycheck. That's what makes you a worker. If you don't really have anything else to sell except your labor, and you sell that, so you're a worker. And yet, even though probably 95% of all Americans are workers, we don't really know much about our own history, and there's a good reason for that. The reason is that our bosses, who are actually the enemies of the workers, our bosses control all the newspapers, and they control all the movies and all the books and all the TV and all the radio stations. So the way they picture organized labor is that it's something strange and alien and outside our existence. So we don't tend to know a lot about it, but we should learn about it because we are beset with great problems. And I was reading along with all of the things you're working on, and I was very impressed because it's clear that you're wanting a better world. And so do many, many, many people, especially now that we've had the pandemic. We want a better world, and we want to see how that could come about. And there are at least three ways that I can think of. One is for some small group to do some really clever thing that will somehow inspire everybody to just have an immediate overturning of the status quo and change everything. I do not believe in this course of action. I don't think it's possible. And even if it were possible, even if somehow somebody could change everything tomorrow, how would they run the world? The only thing that could come of it would be chaos. And that's not a satisfactory answer. The other way, and I think the way that most people believe is going to pay off for us is just by voting. We're going to vote to get a good president. And then the next time we vote, we'll get somebody even better. And the time after that, we'll get somebody even better. And then we will eventually approach perfection through voting. The problem with this idea of voting our way into heaven is that the other side is also participating in this. The employers are also participating in the election process. They're not fools, they're not indifferent, and they're not being distracted or something. They know what they're doing, and they do not lack for ruthlessness. Another way, an entirely possible way that great change might come about is simply by organizing. If we were all organized, we could have anything we wanted in the next day or two, because and also we would be able to run things because we'd be already organized. So getting organized is another way to make great changes. We are not in this country used to the idea of a general strike, but they have them in other countries. I think they're having them in Brazil right now, and they were having them in Colombia last month. People were getting shot down in the streets. A general strike is where we try to get everybody to stay off work till we get what we want. Generally speaking, they haven't been successful, but you can see how it would work if we were able to get enough people organized and we could sustain it for long enough. That was the theory that the industrial workers of the world operated under, that they were going to organize everybody into unions, and then they were going to call a general strike and change the world all at once. That song, Bread and Roses, came from a strike that was organized by the industrial workers of the world. And I agree, it's just the most beautiful of all labor songs. So we study labor history, and there are a lot of ways to do that. One way that people like, and that I like, is just looking at our heroes. And if we look at our heroes, that's pretty much the way our history is organized in school. You know, we look at George Washington, and we look at Thomas Jefferson, and we look at Abraham Lincoln. You know, we look at our heroes, and we say that that's history. So let's look at some labor heroes. And I have to share a screen to do this. I'll start with Moses, because Moses and other progressive leaders were people who tried to unite all workers. Now, I know that there are many labor leaders that you may be familiar with who just tried to organize one part of workers. I don't bother with them. I'm only interested in the ones that wanted to organize everybody. And Moses was one of those. Moses freed the slaves. And Spartacus in the Roman Empire attempted to do the same thing. It was quite obvious from the experiences of Moses and Spartacus that the other side does not want us to get organized. In the case of Spartacus, they crucified him and everybody associated with him. Toussaint L'Ouverture led the most successful of all slave rebellions in Haiti, and that poor country has been punished for it ever since. In the 19th century, the International Association of Working Men was established by these two guys. The one on the left is Frederick Engels. The one on the right is his bosom buddy, Karl Marx. And their first International Association of Working Men did not last very long. It fell apart. But the idea of an international persists to this day. And there has always been, since then, at least one international operating. There were 4 at one time, and maybe even 5. After the Civil War in this country, industry became the predominant. The industrialists took over power from the agriculturalists, and from then on, it became possible to organize people in shops. And so William H. Silvas tried to organize everybody into the National Labor Union. He's remembered today only for the first part of that quote. I love this union cause. And he did love it. He loved it so much that he worked himself to death over it. And soon after his death, the National Labor Union fell apart. The next big effort to organize everybody came from the Knights of Labor. And they had a great success in 1885 when they defeated the Great Southwest Railroad, which was owned by Jay Gould, one of the great labor barons of that period. That was in 1885. And when the Knights of Labor won that, people started joining like crazy. But the next year, in 1886, Jay Gould reneged on the contract and hired a bunch of gunmen. You may remember Jay Gould's famous quote, "I can hire half the working class to kill the other half." And that's what he did. He hired a bunch of gunmen and shot down the strikers and defeated the Knights of Labor in 1886. And that was the beginning of their demise. Eugene Victor Debs, of whom you have already spoken and already heard one of his quotes, he's probably the most quoted person in American labor
I
history,
was able to get it. This is it.
maybe in all of labor.
So what I'll do.
So it's my thing.
Someone needs to mute. Okay, so Eugene Victor Debs started the American Railway Union. Now the bosses were really scared of the railroads because they could pretty much stop commerce, and they had tried it before. And I think this was in the 1890s. He started the American Railway Union, but unfortunately they got involved in a strike against the Pullman Company. The government joined in. They said, well, you can't strike the railroads because they carry United States mail. And so since they carry United States mail, you can't strike them. And so they made sure there was a mail car on every train. And they broke the strike and arrested Debs, put him in jail. Debs helped form the American Socialist Party, which was quite powerful in the early part of the 20th century. They had senators and congressmen and mayors and city councilmen, and they were very strong. They were strongest, by the way, in Oklahoma. That was an example of political organization of the workers. Nowadays, we mostly just talk about unions because we haven't been very successful in political organization in this country. We have no workers' party that has endured and had any lasting significance in the United States. Debs also helped form the Industrial Workers of the World, the most romantic of all American labor organizations. Their idea was to organize all workers into basically trade unions. They didn't even believe in voting. They thought that was just a distraction. And they were going to organize everybody into a union. Then they were going to call a general strike and take over the world. And they may have been a lot more successful if it weren't for the fact that the government stepped in. And beginning with the lynching of Frank Little in 1917, the government came down very, very hard on the industrial workers of the world. And they began a long, steady fall. They still exist, but it's mostly college students. And their main source of income is to sell songs, because they wrote all these great songs and great poems that we still use, including Solidarity Forever, which is the hymn of the labor movement. But at the time that the industrial workers of the world was operating, they hated the AFL, and the AFL hated them. And so there was no united labor movement at all. The Socialist Party of America was one of two in the entire world that did not support their own nation in World War I, which was very, very interesting. The other Socialist Party that did not support their own nation in World War I was in Russia. I just like to talk about Ella Mae Wiggins, so I just threw her in here. In 1929, there was a big textile strike. Ella Mae Wiggins was a textile worker in a rag factory, the very lowest kind of a textile factory. And she tried to bring the black and white strikers together. She tried to unite the white and the black. Of course, that was always the biggest problem for American labor, was racism. It kept us divided when we needed to be organized. So LMA Wiggins spoke up for that, and that's why they shot her. She was killed with a shotgun, blown to pieces, and left behind her 5 children. This is a picture of her funeral. She's just one of my heroes. In 1935, we finally got the beginning of a united labor movement. The Committee for Industrial Organizing was formed within the AFL, the American Federation of Labor. They were soon kicked out, though, and we were divided again over the idea of industrial organizing. The CIO wanted to organize everybody, whereas the AFL wanted to organize only the craft union, only the most highly trained and most sophisticated and highest paid of all the workers. For example, electricians and, for example, machinists. But they wouldn't organize the rest of the people in the shop, whereas the CIO did. And they said, we're going to organize everybody that moves. And we don't care if they're gay. We don't care if they're of different colors. We don't care if they're men or women. If they work, if they push a broom or operate the highest level of machinery, whatever they do, we're going to organize them together. And that's called industrial organizing. And it was the great accomplishment of American labor. It was our giant step forward. And we organized millions and millions. It was so effective that the old AFL also started industrial organizing. So as we got past World War II, both the AFL and the CIO were both organizing everybody that they possibly could. But they ran into Iraq in 1947. The government came down very, very hard against unions. And in our own time, I think a lot of us can remember when Reagan was elected and unionism became a scourge and was very heavily set back. From 1947 to 1995, we lost 2/3 of our members. In the early part of the 1950s, we had 35% of the American workforce was organized into unions. By 1995, that was down to 13%, and it is presently around 11%. So from 1947 to 1995, we lost drastically. Not only did we lose members, but we also lost our idealism. We lost our romanticism. We lost our commitment to progressive causes. We gave up pretty much on civil rights, with some exceptions. We gave up on the women's movement. We were hostile to the anti-war movement, and frankly, they gave up on internationalism. Also, they didn't work much well with other unions from other countries. And as a result, they became more and more isolated and smaller and weaker. But in 1995, things began to change. For the first time in over 100 years, the AFL-CIO, they were united by then, the AFL-CIO elected a progressive leadership that included this woman. That's Linda Chavez Thompson. She's alive today and still active in San Antonio. She was the first person, quote, of color elected into the top leadership, and she was the first woman elected into the top leadership. They had had a succession of white men up until 1995, and those white men had always chosen their successors for over 100 years in the AFL and in the AFL-CIO. So Linda Chavez Thompson was a glass ceiling breaker and a great change in the labor movement. Right after 1995, things really began to look up. And we could look back at Eugene Victor Debs again, our great hero, and remember what he said in 1894 in the blue. I hope you'll read along there. 10,000 times has the labor movement stumbled and bruised itself. We have been enjoined by the courts, assaulted by thugs, charged by the militia, traduced by the press, frowned upon in public opinion, and deceived by politicians. But notwithstanding all this and all these, labor is today the most vital and potential power this planet has ever known. And its historic mission is as certain of ultimate realization as is the setting of the sun. Good things happened. Good things are happening right now. Just 2 weeks ago, the leadership of the AFL-CIO changed again. The president of the AFL-CIO died in office, and a woman was selected to take over the presidency. The other two slots at the top of the AFL-CIO went to two Black men. So we have the most diverse leadership that we've ever had, and the most forward-looking and the most progressive leadership that we have ever had. They take on progressive causes, they look for ways to be internationalists, and they look for ways to practice solidarity, not only between unions, but also between unions and the broader community and the progressive causes of which you are also advocates. Liz Schuler is from a craft union, the IBEW, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. Fred Redmond is from the Steelworkers, an industrial union, and Teferi Gebri is from the public sector. His union organizes city, county, and state people. Teferi is, in addition to being an African-American man, he's actually an African. He is an immigrant from Ethiopia. So we have this very diverse leadership now, doing great things, changing the whole nature of the labor movement, or changing the whole nature of the AFL-CIO. And that's really, to me, that's really good news. The legislation that they're working on is really outstanding too. The PRO Act is their number one priority right now. It is the best labor legislation since 1935, because we have been under attack by the government most of the time since then. And labor law has gotten harder and worse consistently, especially since 1947. So if they get the PRO Act passed, we'll be back into organizing the millions again, and it would be wonderful. I organize labor history not just by looking at the heroes, because the heroes is the most fun, but actually the most important thing is just how well organized are we, and how powerful are we? How much can we really affect the economy and the world around us? So labor history, as we understand it today, started in the latter half of the 17th century. At that time in England, the employer class took over from the aristocracy. So to be in power in England after the 17th century was not a matter of being born into the aristocracy as much as it was a power of being able to employ people. And the employers took over in England. England began to take over the world. And by the end of the next century, by the end of the 18th century, capitalism dominated the world. As capitalists took power, it was a very good thing for the capitalists, but it was also very good for the workers, because for the first time in our history, we weren't slaves, we weren't serfs. We could actually change jobs. We still had to have a job. We had to be exploited by somebody, but we could change from one job to the other, and we could organize. And it's a good thing that we did, because if we had left things at the natural level of wages under capitalism is survival, the very lowest possible wages. We could not have risen above survival had we not organized, but we did organize. And since then, living standards have come up for working people to the extent that we were organized. Lots of economists today like to look at graphs that show that around from World War II up till 1975, as productivity and wealth increased in the United States, so did wages. After around 1975, that was no longer true. Wealth and productivity went up and wages didn't. And the reason is because by then, it was very clear in 1972 that labor no longer had the power that it had enjoyed from between 1935 and 1975. As I said a while ago, we never succeeded in building an actual workers' political party, and we still don't have one, but we do have unions. And unions are organized into locals, amalgamated locals, national locals, international locals, and the AFL-CIO. Those are different ways that unions are organized. A local is just one. For example, my union was organized when they organized the plant in Grand Prairie that was known as Greater American Aerospace. It was part of General Motors. And so they only had one contract with just that company, and that's a union local. Later on, they began to get more contracts with other companies, and that is an amalgamated local. Presently, my union, UAW Local 848 in Grand Prairie, has 4 contracts with 4 different aerospace companies. Other kinds of unions, national unions, are mostly in transportation, because if you want to organize, for example, an airline, you'd have to organize all over the country all at once, because the airline has facilities all over the country and they can move them from one to the other. So you have to organize the entire nation at once. That's true, especially in transportation, and it's a different kind of union. Most unions belong to an international. My union is the Auto Workers Union, UAW. Union of Auto Workers is what it's usually called. And they call themselves an international because they have locals in Puerto Rico and China, Canada, and maybe 2 or 3 other places. And those internationals have a lot of money and a lot of power. Unions have a lot more money than other progressive organizations, because our idea of dues is more than just a friendly payment. Most of us pay at least 2 hours a month as dues. And that could be, if you're making $25 an hour, that's $50 a month that you're paying. And if you've got 400,000 members, like the UAW does, then that adds up to quite a bit of money. So, and they have real estate. They have a lot more power than we usually think of as another progressive organization, Planned Parenthood or something like that. They don't just depend on charity, in other words. They do depend on charity for political work, because the government does not let unions spend any of their ordinary money on political work. They have to have a bake sale or a raffle or something like that in order to get money for their political work. Over the entire thing is the American Federation of Labor Congress of Industrial Organizations, AFL-CIO. And I use the term over advisedly, because they're not really over. They don't really command the rest of the labor movement, but they are the federation. They are the organizing point for all of the unions together. They don't have all the money. They don't have much money at all. Dues to the AFL-CIO is more like $1 a month instead of the $50 or $60 that people are paying to their internationals. So the AFL-CIO does not have piles and piles of money, but it is the organizing center for the labor movement. So that's the kinds of unions that we have. The government stepped in hard, as I said, in 1947. Unions became isolated. They gave up their progressive aspects, and they tended to suffer and diminish. But change began to be evident in the union movement, I guess, around the 1970s. The steel workers began to have some progressive candidates running for office and made a big splash. In 1995, we got the new leadership with Linda Chavez Thompson. In 1997, they took out their anti-communist prohibition. Anti-communism was a fundamental part of the labor movement in America from 1947 to 1997. In 1997, they just took that out of their constitution. In 1999, recognizing how bad racism had divided them, they changed one of their biggest orientations. Their orientation previously was to deport all undocumented workers. So if you were not here, if you weren't a citizen here, the AFL-CIO wanted you to be deported. After 1999, they said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. From now on, we're going to try to organize them. And so Some of our best organizing efforts since then have been among the undocumented. That's particularly true here in Texas in meat processing, because, for example, they just organized a big union. I think it's 600 members in Waco at a meat processing plant. So organizing undocumented workers was a bonanza for the labor movement, and a great improvement. Also, paying more attention to the women's movement was great. We get more women, we get more undocumented than any other of the new members coming in. The Texas AFL-CIO has a special campaign on climate change. The labor movement has a pride division for gays. The labor movement has emphasized its civil rights roots and its community roots. And nowadays, when you see a progressive event, you very often see labor there. That was not true prior to 1995. And good news, union approval rating, this was announced 2 days ago. Union approval rating is no longer down around 50% like it was. It is now up to 68%, the highest it has been since 1965. And I already told you about the great changes in our AFL-CIO leadership. So I'm ending on a happy note. Liz Schuler, the president of the AFL-CIO, in her first meeting with labor leaders said, quote, "Labor Day is when we raise our voices." And that explains how I happen to be here with you today, raising mine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gene. Let me share my screen again.
Super good information.
Our virtual chalice extinguishing is by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The labor movement was the principal force that transformed misery and despair into hope and progress. Our closing song today is Solidarity Forever, written by Ralph Chaplin, an American writer, artist, and labor activist. Our speaker, Gene Lantz, will be performing it for us. Let's all sing along while remaining muted. Take it away, Gene.
Okay, in 1915, Ralph Chaplin was a member of the Industrial Workers of the World. As I said, they wrote all the great songs and all the great poems in the labor movement. I hope you'll pay attention to the words in this song, whether you sing it or not, because these are great words. When the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. Yet what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? But the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Our union makes us strong. They have taken untold millions that they never toiled to earn, but without our brain and muscle, not a single wheel can turn. We can break their haughty power, gain our freedom when we learn that the union makes us strong. Sing it out now. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong.
Thank you so much, Gene. And to all of you who joined our Zoom service today. After the benediction, Gene will be able to stay and talk with us for a while as we visit for a bit. The adult groups will start at 11:30. We hope that each of you on your individual path through the joys and questions of life found some common ground with your fellow travelers today. For our benediction, we will hear another quote from Eugene V. Debs. This picture is of Debs campaigning in 1908. It will be read for us by Mary Kappas.
Years ago, I recognized my kinship with all living things, and I made up my mind that I was not one bit better than the meanest on the earth. I said then, and I say now, that while there is a lower class, I am in it. While there is a criminal element, I am of it. While there is a soul in prison, I am not free.
Thank you again, Mary. Now, everyone feel free to unmute and we can talk with Jean and visit for a bit.